And yes, the latest number is that 70% at least of US physicians are now employed by an employer, that is an integrated delivery network for some hospital system. And it's rising. Now, it's arguable where is the ceiling, because is private practice going to just totally disappear? I don't think so, but it's questionable where the number is going to be. So my question is, do you see that as a threat or an opportunity as there are fewer and fewer people going into private practice?
So I think, so to share sort of how Circuit looks at this, I think that there's a real opportunity for a company that can achieve scale. And I think we're having very good success over the last couple of years. I think we've staked out a brand as being a healthcare delivery organization that connects other healthcare delivery organizations to research. I think there's an opportunity to engage physicians at the fellowship level, at the residency level, to start them thinking research as part of their practice, whatever that practice is. I think that as long as physicians are interested in doing research, health systems will go along. They just want to see physician leadership. I'm in these meetings all the time now. One of the things that happened to Circuit was at the end of last year, we were engaged in a deep strategic partnership with LabCorp, which has been an absolutely unbelievable partnership. I mean, they truly have accelerated Circuit's growth. They're investors in Circuit, in full disclosure, and that's been a terrific thing for us. And so they've brought us to their key account clients, and so brought us into the rooms with their healthcare administrators and their chief medical officers, and we've had exactly these conversations. And the focus has really been around, how do we kind of get into this? Why do we get into this? What will it look like? What's in it for us on every side, which is totally appropriate. But the argument's been compelling. So what we say is that, I'm with you. I think that, we've seen this once before where everyone's like, well, there should be no private practice. But the problem is physicians are really good at running the business of healthcare. And typically speaking, administrators without physician leadership tend to struggle in that model. My dad was of the generation that they all went into private practice, and they all got acquired, and they all went back to private practice shortly after that. And I've already seen a few of these cases. But I do think that consolidation is part of the rule. I think we'll see more and more of this sort of consolidation, but I think we'll see more successful experiments done with physician autonomy or physician leadership in those organizations. I'm friends with a bunch of docs who serve now as administrators in these things. And I think that's been a better outcome. And those physicians are absolutely interested in research in new spaces. So I'm generally speaking very optimistic about the ability to build new infrastructure and new access for patients.
So I want to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, if you could just go to the reactions tab and raise your hand, and then I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Anthony, do you have a question?
Yeah.
I mean, this obviously, this is a data intense exercise, so maybe you can address that. Anthony?
Yeah. Thanks, Arlen. Well, first of all, Irfan, what a great story. And I'm a huge fan of physician-founded companies that actually make impact. So congratulations on that. I'm so glad you came on this morning.
Thanks,
I
Anthony.
just have a couple of quick questions. And then one is, it doesn't sound like you're actually finding patients for clinical trials other than the ones that are in your members' practices, correct? So you're not out there looking for a lot of patients.
We started that way. We started inside our network. And when we built Trial Journey, what we realized we had accidentally built was actually a very good patient engagement and awareness tool. We haven't spent a whole lot of money on our SCM and really kind of making the consumer-facing side of it. But Trial Journey is live. It's got an enterprise backend, but it's got a consumer-facing front end. So it has the same sort of value prop that a Healthgrades does or a Yelp does to help people make that first decision. I think you'll see a post. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next year you start seeing Trial Journey kind of broadly advertised to consumers, because I agree that really the battle starts with just raising the awareness of clinical research as a care option more broadly. So largely our work is based inside our network, but we've just started that work of making it more mass appeal.
Do you have a pediatric part of your clinical trials?
We've just started. We have a couple of practices that have joined the network. So Circuit's thesis, there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's other players in the space, which I actually always like because, first of all, I know these CEOs, their heart's in the right place and they're building great companies. And candidly, it would take 20 circuits to actually solve the problem we have out there. So the more, the merrier. And what we see is that it's really about can you grow your particular thesis. So our thesis is we like health systems that have at least about 150,000 patients, but aren't so scaled up that there's 9 layers of bureaucracy, right? So it tends to be this sweet spot between 100,000 to 500,000 patients in network. The decision making is fast. People can understand it, and we can get deployed kind of relatively quickly. And the last 2 systems we've had have had pediatric opportunities for us with doctors putting up their hands and saying, yeah, I'd like to be part of this.
Yeah, we need you. And then Arlen's remark about data is very timely because just in about 10 days, I'm giving a talk to the FDA and MIT about real world data and analytics. Can you comment on your strategy in that domain? Because it'll be, I imagine, such an important part of your clinical trials, right?
Yep. So I'll share that. So data in clinical trials, and so I would say there's sort of 3 buckets. One is this broader idea of patient matching. Could we assemble large data sets of maybe pooled resources? Both NIH is doing this and some private companies, our friends over at Deep Six is a good example, are looking at this and sort of say, we think we've built a tool that can move through very large data sets, healthcare data sets, and identify from both structured and unstructured data candidates who would be much better to be evaluated. They're still not going to be perfect. Vijay Pillai, who built Oracle Life Sciences, famously said, the EMR is the best tool we have, and it's pretty terrible. It's about 50% effective. It's just the best tool we have. So that's a really good, I always like that because the EMR then is a good litmus test for, are you an optimist or a pessimist, right? I'm an optimist, obviously. I was an operator. So, I tend, well, it's 50% effective. Let's get every bit of effectiveness we can out of that because the broad industry is so inefficient that even 50% effectiveness is a good thing. And if an AI tool can get us farther along in terms of out of that massive data, where are the really great hits? There's a lot of efficiency to be created, fewer screen fails, faster enrollment time, shorter windows. I think that's real value. So that's one pool, is patient identification, essentially, and potentially tying it to engagement. We don't do that work. We partner with our friends who do that work. We solve other problems that we are certainly behind the EMR firewall, but we don't do that particular thing. The second data space I think that's interesting is, what is the data of the clinical trial? So the patient enters, they're having experiences. Can they have those experiences at home? Can they put them down? So that's ePro, which is patient-reported outcomes. It's eConsent now. I think we're getting some very sophisticated tools. There's eSource, really the source data set. That used to have to happen on paper and pen in the office. We've all gone to this whole digital space in the last couple of years. So that's another interesting data space that we don't play in. We use off-the-rack solutions in there, largely because we think both of those spaces are highly competed, well-capitalized companies with very interesting propositions. And what we'll say is that with Trial Journey, we believe we've created the last data space, which is really the experience data space. What does a patient actually feel about being in a clinical trial? And what could you do with those insights? And so where I think that machine learning has got a lot of interesting things to say to ourselves is, imagine you could ask a patient a 2-minute rating and review experience after every single clinical trial visit. Well, we know that 1 in 5 patients across the board, right now there's 1 million patients in clinical trials this year, 20% of them across the board will drop out of that trial they're in. You can imagine the cost, the delays, all of that gets priced into the price of our drugs. So it has real impacts on every single American. So that 20% dropout problem really does not have a definitive solution. So a data space that we think is really interesting. We know a lot about consumer engagement in healthcare from Carrie and Dave Hicks, the founders of HealthGrades. Carrie's our executive chairman, Dave's our strategic advisor. Again, both of all 4 of us are friends with Arlen. So in that space, you could look at visit over visit satisfaction and identify who went from 5 stars, 5 stars, 2 stars. Okay, that's very simple, very interesting. It triggers an outcome. Where things get really interesting is once that database starts to populate at scale, you could start running really interesting programs on it to ask yourselves, are there questions that consistently predict lack of compliance on the next visit or dropout? Even more exciting to me is, are there questions you can insert into certain situations because the machine has learned when is the right time to do these things that actually improve compliance and engagement, that remind the patient why they're doing these things and why they chose to participate and why it's important to complete the trial? That, I think, is a new frontier type stuff and beautifully set up for AI and ML to have a big impact in.
Thanks,
Although,
Charles.
one
Charles,
caveat, the last time I wrote code was in 1987. So, I may not know what I'm talking about. That's possible too.